I love you, Sepida. This is Farida and George.
Allah, dear, how are you?
We miss you so much. Your family is wonderful.
Thank you so much. We miss you as well. Likewise.
All right. We don't take your
Have
time.
a beautiful
We are
family.
going to listen to your beautiful presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hopefully I will do justice.
So it is, thank you, Sapira, for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you online here on our Clearwater Baha'i Adult Learning Zoom chat that we have every weekend on Sundays at 11 a.m. So that being said, we are almost at the starting time, but I'm going to be giving a speaker biography, short biography. You've given us a nice summary about, what you've done in your life and just about who you are and what you're going to be talking about. And if you could kindly introduce your subject, I'm going to just summarize from the summary that you provided us. So that being said, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me at this gathering. It's an honor to be here and presenting. The topic is the U.S. immigration law and the perspective of a Baha'i solution and perspective on the future of the immigration.
Mira. Cool.
In U.S., yes. Thank you.
So I do want to ask you now, let's see, what time are we at? 10:59. All right, great. We're about ready to get going. So I'm going to give the introduction now. So Sapira Iskandari, she is born in Iran, Tehran, Iran, and she is now an immigration lawyer. She immigrated to the US at age 9. She has a BA in communications from the University of Tampa and a Juris Doctorate degree from Stetson College of Law. She has been an immigration practitioner from 1996 to the present day. She served as the Florida Bar Investigative Member of the Unlicensed Practice of Law Committee, UPL Committee, for 4 years. Hearing officer at St. Petersburg Housing Authority in Pinellas County, appointed to the Board of Trustees at the Community Law Program, and she's also a recipient of the 6th Judicial Circuit Pro Bono Awards for 3 consecutive years. And she served on the St. Petersburg Interfaith Committee and the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of St. Petersburg. Sapira Iskandari Esquire is going to be speaking, as she mentioned in her title, the brief summary of the status of U.S. immigration and the bright future of this area of law in accordance with the teachings of Bahá'u'lláh. And in a short summary, the ever-escalating draconian U.S. immigration laws call humanity to conscientiously look within inwardly, to reevaluate our own individual moral values as to what extent we are willing to forego decency and at what price. The statistics of the past several years demonstrate society's apathy and laxity to these ever-increasing crises facing humanity. The numbness to the devastating effects on society as a whole continues. It is time for us to pause and revisit some of the basics that brought us all to this point in our history. We will reflect on our trajectory into the future, but we must also reflect on our past to realize why and how we reached this unfortunate point. The USA is a land of immigrants. Considering the rich diversity of the USA, it has become the land of the free and the brave to many of its newest citizens. Many immigrants came to the USA fleeing religious persecution and searching for a better future. There was not much of an immigration process in place, and yet now we have the USA that we all live in and we all call home now, yet we need to reflect as to why the immigration process is becoming so difficult at this present moment. To the extent that the USA is closing its borders to countless immigrants. Some of these immigrants are fleeing their homeland for their very lives. and other immigrants have special skills and expertise that are very valuable to advance the interests of the USA, the United States of America. So with that being said, Sepideh, please, is all yours. I am going to be muting myself now.
Thank you greatly for the introduction. It's really an honor to be here. I hope that I can do justice to the topic, especially from the angle of the presentation of the solution, which is the Baha'i teachings with respect to the unfortunate plight of US immigration laws. Let's begin with a little bit of a history. When did the immigrants enter United States? Was in the 1600s. We had the British that fled religious persecution, came to United States in the early 1600s. Unfortunately in 1609, 9 years after their immigration to United States, they brought over the Africans as slaves. So this racial tension in our nation stems back from the time of the slavery in the 1600s. The land was occupied by the native Indians, American Indians, who were unfortunately slaughtered by the occupation of their lands, unfortunate as it is. And yesterday we were celebrating Independence Day that marked the independence of United States from the Great Britain. Now, how the history has brought us to this point. We had first the North European countries immigrating, which is England, and then later on the Central Europe, and further along, they were trying to restrict Eastern Europeans. So by the time that we reached to the 1900s or early 1900s, then we had the Eastern Europeans coming in and the Syrians and Lebanese in the early 1900s. You had all these, again, European nations coming from their own foreign lands to this country. Then when did we start having or starting to have these US immigration laws that are restrictive? Where we had the Immigration Act of the 1920s. They began first requiring the individuals that are coming to our shores. Many came through the Ellis Island, as we know, the Statue of Liberty in Staten Island, New York. It was a very easy process. They got off their boats. Over 2 million Italians came as early as 1900s. There were more. 2 other millions came from Poland. As they entered these shores of United States through the Ellis Island, then we had other shores that we opened up for the entry of these immigrants. They simply would walk off their boats, sign a book that was available for them, and essentially they would enter the country. There was not any of the immigration laws that we have today. Now, let's get speed up to the US immigration law that we have today. Over the past few years, it is making literally impossible for the immigration lawyers to even function as lawyers, and even now immigration judges who are reluctant to serve after so many years as immigration judges and are planning on retiring and leaving the practice as a whole, including immigration lawyers. Now, why is that? We have at this point, and we're going to give you all these statistics. There are more than 43 million, this is the outline number 1 that we're viewing, if hopefully you're seeing the screen that I'm seeing right now. There are more than 43 million immigrants in the US, according to the Migration Policy Institute. About 11 million are undocumented immigrants. An estimated 20% of documented immigrants are under age 25. This is according to the Department of Homeland Security. Again, immigration used to be in a different agency called Immigration and Naturalization Services. Now it came into the part of the cabinet, one of the cabinets of the US government under the executive branch, which is the US Department of Homeland Security. The Migration Policy Institute said in 2016 that about 1.9 million people were eligible for DACA. So the question becomes, why do we have only 788,000 that are requesting for DACA status and has been accepted? Again, according to the US Citizenship and Immigration Services. This again falls under the US Department of Homeland Security, which was not back in 2000. It was a separate agency of its own. Now, in order to apply for DACA, what is DACA really stands for? It's what you have heard over the years, dreamers. It is allowing, again, younger than 31 who arrived in United States and have been continuously living, it's number 7, since June 15, 2007, and who are under age 31 as of June 15, 2012. So you have these applicants who were older than age 31. They were not qualified. And this was done through an executive order from the past administration. It says in the Center for American Progress survey of roughly 3,000 DACA recipients, 9/10 of respondents said they had jobs. Their average hourly wage was $17.46 an hour, which is up from $10.29 before receiving DACA. So you can see the economic disparity and of course, the advantage of having the undocumented immigrants to be undocumented. After getting DACA, nearly 80% of respondents said they got driver's licenses. Now, when did this Real ID Act that required some sort of a lawful status, having social security numbers, and when did that come into being? It was right after September 11. When we had that tragic event, the government started looking at immigration policies and said, well, let's limit, because those individuals obviously who were here on visitor visas, and in fact had their visitors visas extended after they were gone, and had done the destruction to the US with the Twin Towers. So they looked and said, with the Real ID Act, how do we go about securing our country? And one of the decisions was, well, we're not going to give any driver's licenses. So now with DACA, individuals were able to obtain work authorization. They were able to obtain their driver's licenses, and which now it's, again, as you heard, it's on the news every day. The policy is being attacked, and they want to do away with all of these 788,000 DACA recipients and essentially deport them. That is where we are.
Could you clarify again? So who couldn't get driver's licenses?
At this point, majority of the undocumented immigrants, they were, especially in the past few years, they were racially profiled. So if you were a Caucasian undocumented, which there's plenty of the Caucasian undocumented members in our community, they were not being targeted. Who was being targeted was the so-called the dark-skinned Mexican, Latinos, Hispanics from the Central America, South America, Indians from India, Middle Easterns that were dark complexion. They would essentially get picked up at bus stations. They would literally come to these bus stations and pick these people up. They were not violating any laws. I recall one client of mine who is from Mexico, does not have any criminal background, simply was pulled over. They were going to church as a family. She was pulled over, and the officer in Polk County essentially said, you have a dim light. She didn't have any dim light on her car. It was just a pretext to her detention. Immediately, the officer calls the Border Patrol, ICE. She's, while they're waiting for the ICE agents to come by, he turns to her and says, I'm sending you back home to pick your beans. This is the amount of hatred that this country, this nation, this land of immigrants we're dealing with. Now, let's go to this. Statistics will make a lot of things bring light to this issue. The Center for American Progress estimated that the US would lose about $460 billion in GDP. What is GDP? Gross domestic product. About 700,000 people could lose their jobs. And of course, you have more than 1,800 governors, attorney generals, mayors, state representatives, judges, police chiefs that wrote a letter supporting the Dreamers and the DACA. Now, let's scroll down and see what this gross domestic product would affect. Let's take our state, Florida, for instance. Number of DACA recipients, as you see, I'm going to put my marker right there, 32,795,000 people. Estimated number of DACA workers, if you scroll down further, it's 28,532. Estimated annual GDP, 1.5 billion DACA workers on the gross domestic product with the loss of removing the DACA workers. Now, let us look at what other restrictions you're having in just this past 2-3 years that we're talking about. We're not going back any further. Although these restrictions were coming down the pipe from 1920, mind you, until now. But let's look some other most recent, and these are humanitarian issues. It has nothing to do with partisan politics. And then we're going to get to the solution of it. Why did God send a manifestation of God for this age that we're living in to address these issues? And what's the cause of these issues is prejudice. Look at the detention center. The court documents shows as of June 8, there were 124 children in 3 detention centers. One of them is Carnes, the other one is Dilley, and I forget the third one, housed alongside family members. Another 507 children were in the Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters as of June 7th. Now, we have a federal court judge in DC strike down this policy and upheld the Flores Agreement that requires children not to be detained more than 20 days. Now, what really propelled this federal court to do so? COVID-19. It's infested these detention facilities, these horrid, horrible conditions that they're subjecting the immigrants, many of them fleeing persecution. Same reasons that our ancestors that came and crossed the shores and came on this land hundreds of years ago, over 400 years ago, and ongoing. So now, what do we have? We have immigrants like myself who may be either recent naturalized or first generation, fifth generation immigrants, rooting back to immigrants. They became the gatekeepers. They decided that we're going to hate and have prejudice against others. Now, asylum proposed rules. This is how, by the way, I wanted to mention that how my family is in the United States. It's through asylum. Now, how long did it take our family to get asylum, from asylum status to U.S. citizenship or the path to naturalization, as many refer to? 11 years. Now, this was the better era of immigration. This was back in 1979, and we finalized it in 1989. Now, what are the rules that are being proposed and is going to go into effect as of August 25, 2020? Why are we going over all of this? Simple. The urgency of the matter facing humanity. And if we say, well, that's US immigration's laws, has nothing to do with Canada, has nothing to do with Europe and other parts of the world, we're wrong. Because it impacts all across the world. And we've seen that through COVID-19. Now, what will it do, this proposed asylum laws? Essentially, I'm not going to go through all the lists, you can see for yourself. It is going to close asylum to the faces of many immigrants fleeing their countries. They're not able to get their applications reviewed. A lot of these forms have been revamped. There are like 20 pages or even more of questions that are really has legal terms that it requires an attorney to define these legal terms. Now, do we have pro bono attorneys? Yes, we do. Thank God that we do have some that do Now, do they cover all the expenses? No. Is it an expensive process? Yes. What is the plight of the immigrants if they cannot afford legal representation? Just like other areas of law, if you're a criminal in this country and you cannot afford legal representation, then you can imagine the type of service that you receive. Not much. And that's why the prisons are filled. And with what? With minorities, with African Americans. Because why? It caters to a segment of the society that are affluent. So the economic disparities affect us all across the board. Now, so now the judges and the Border Patrol have ultimate control over these millions of asylum applicants that are coming to our shores. Why? Because of the same reasons that many of us are here, for freedom. This final rule is 97 pages long. It talks about not issuing work authorization. So someone can be here, even if they apply within that 1 year, because remember the IRA that went into effect in 1996 required the asylum applicants to file their application within that 1 year requirement. So now you have asylum seekers that would wait for 180 days to get their work authorization. It's going to be extended to a whole year, 365 days. Then, of course, the discretion of the judges and the Border Patrol to just flat out deny these asylum applications without giving these individuals due process. Now, as of June 24th, a lot of the employment-based immigration came to a halt as well. H-1Bs, H-2Bs, these are the seasonal workers. The workers we depend to pick our strawberries, watermelons. These were the Mexicans, the South Americans that came in through these H-2Bs. L visa, the L visa came, also suspends the issuance of the L visa. Now, also immigrant visas and all other non-immigrant visas of members of Myanmar and also Laos. The Laotians are being restricted. I have clients who essentially called and said, well, what is happening to my spouse? Sorry, this is the plight of our US immigration laws. We have to wait. And now the officers are being furloughed. As of August the 3rd, we will see across United States, 80% of the US immigration officers are losing their jobs for the first time in 20, 30 years. Now, all of this bleak plight of the US immigration laws and where we're going. What is the benefits of immigration in this country? Of course, we've seen many of the entrepreneurs, for instance, Digital Revolution were co-founded by immigrants of Intel, Sun Microsystems, eBay, Google, Yahoo. It goes down the list. I mean, it's really an never exhausting list of immigrants' contribution to this nation. Are we a burden to this country? No. Are we exploiting the resources of this country? No. Are they the taxpayers? Absolutely. It says on the bottom that we compose a lot of the labor force. We provide jobs, we create jobs, and are the employers and even the originators and founders of these companies, and we pay more in taxes than we receive in benefits. Now, let us do away with this us and them, because all of us, again, let's remember we're all immigrants on this land. Let's see what the Baha'i, the solution to all of this is. First, the problem is what? It's fundamental prejudice. There's no other way of looking at this. We could talk about, well, no, we've got unity. We have in my church or my synagogue or my mosque, peoples of all races. There's, we have unity within ourselves. It can't be prejudice. Yes, it is. Because there's no other reason why we're doing ethnic cleansing. There's no other reasons why the African Americans have been under attack since they were brought as slaves into this country in the 1600s. So let's look at now the solution. Why are we where we are, and what is the answer to all of the problems that we're faced with? Let us go into the outline that I have with the writings of Bahá'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá and the highest institutions of our faith, the Universal House of Justice. This is by Abdu'l-Bahá, who is the eldest son of the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Bahá'u'lláh, the glory of God. Concerning the prejudice of race, he states it is an illusion, a superstition pure and simple. For God created us all of one race. In the beginning also there were no limits and boundaries between the different lands. No part of the earth belonged more to one people than to another. In the sight of God, there is no difference between the various races. Why should man invent such a prejudice? That's a great question. How did we invent prejudice? How can we uphold war caused by such an illusion? God has not created men that they should destroy one another. All races, tribes, sects, and classes share equally in the bounty of their heavenly Father, which is the basic teachings of all faiths. Now, the critical question is, how did we get to this point? Why did we get to this point? The only real difference Abdu'l-Bahá speaks of lies in the degree of faithfulness, of obedience to the laws of God. There are some who are lighted torches. There are others who shine as stars in the sky of humanity. The lovers of mankind, these are the superior men of whatever nation, creed, or color they may be. Equally mischievous with racial prejudice is political or patriotic prejudice. This time has now come when narrow national patriotism should be merged in the wider patriotism whose country is the world. And then Baha'u'lláh says, of old it hath been revealed, love of one's country is an element of the faith of God. The tongue of grandeur hath, in the day of his manifestation, proclaimed, it is not his to boast who loveth his country, but it is his who loveth the world. Through the power released by these exalted words, he hath lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to the birds of men's heart, and had obliterated every trace of restriction and limitation from God's holy book. So now, we came and invented, it's an illusion, but it's man's invention, Aldo, of hating one another based on our complexions, our ethnicity. And then what did we do? We wanted to become gatekeepers. Some of the immigrants came, instead of celebrating their identities, especially their cultural identities, they said, well, maybe we should assimilate. We have to conform and become the phrase that you hear, Americanized. So whatever that stands for. So does that mean part of this Americanization is building these prejudices towards other races and nationalities? That's a question to be asked of oneself, and to really delve within ourselves and see, what does it really mean? Or is it what Abdu'l-Bahá states, that we're flowers of this beautiful garden, that if we maintain our identities, if we do not change our names, if we celebrate our differences together, we enhance the beauty of this garden, correct? My name being Sepida, for instance, cooking Persian food because that's my cultural heritage, being Iranian, enhances the beauty of this world. This is what Abdu'l-Bahá states. Behold, a beautiful garden full of flowers, shrubs, and trees. Each flower has a different charm, a peculiar beauty, its own delicious perfume and beautiful color. The trees too have varied. How varied are they in size, in growth, in the foliage, and what different fruits they bear. Yet all these flowers, shrubs, and trees spring from the self same earth. The same sun shines upon them, and the same clouds give them rain. So it is with humanity. It is made up of many races, and its peoples are of a different color, white, black, yellow, brown, and red, but they all come from the same God, and all are servants to him. This diversity among the children of men has unhappily not the same effect as it has among the vegetable creation, where the Spirit has shown is more harmonious. Among men exists a diversity of animosity, and it is this that causes wars and hatred among the different nations of the world. This is from Paris Talk, page 51. So now one looks and says, well, we're going to talk about uniting them. And yes, there are two forms of unity, as Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'lláh has outlined for us so beautifully. There is a limited unity and they have the unlimited unity. The limited unity, of course, is the unity we witness amongst ourselves, the unity between the races, the unity of, between the political parties, unities of nationalities. But God is striving humanity to a bigger calling. What is this bigger calling? The unity of humanity, right? The unity where I can look into a face of my fellow human being and say, you are my brother and you are my sister. We're all parts of one human race. And also beyond that, to feel that we're all one soul. Let me also, before moving on to that writing that says we're all one soul, let's read what the danger of this unity is. We're facing it right now. Let's not overlook the fact of the plight we're in right now is exactly what this is saying. This unity is a danger that the nations and peoples of the earth can no longer endure. The consequences are too terrible to contemplate, too obvious to require any demonstration. The well-being of mankind, Baha'u'lláh wrote more than a century ago, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So this is the call to humanity that we need to unite. And part of this unity is the unity between the sexes. We cannot neglect and address one prejudice and not address the other prejudices that are out there. Why? Because Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha clearly are stating, unless and until, it says, and let it be known once more that until women and men recognize and realize equality, social and political progress here or anywhere will not be possible. And further on, it says peace will not come about, because as women being the nurturers of their young children, they do not want to, have wars to be perpetuated in our world. Why? They don't want their children going to wars and getting killed. Simple. And who is the first educator of these children, of these brilliant young minds? Mothers. So therefore, the education of women is stressed as well in this Baha'i dispensation, in this era of evolution of humanity. This is what Abdu'l-Baha states about the future of our immigration system. Many people, when I speak to, they said, well, you're going to be out of job. I said, good, I hope so. Because I don't want to be out of a job because our immigration officers are being furloughed or our borders are being closed off. No, we want to have this kind of going out of my profession. It says it is very evident that in the future there shall be no centralization in the countries of the world, be they constitutional in government, Republican or Democratic in form. It says the US, United States, may be held up as the example of future government. That is to say, each province will be independent in itself, the sovereign states that we have, but there will be federal union protecting the interests of the various independent states. It may not be a Republican or a Democratic form. To cast aside centralization, which promotes despotism, is the exigency of the time. Control. Despotism is control, right? Which we're seeing this in our world. This will be productive of international peace. Another fact of equal importance in bringing about international peace is women's suffrage, which we just spoke of. Why is it important to have the equality of the sexes? That is to say, when perfect equality shall be established between men and women, peace may be realized for the simple reason that womankind in general will never favor warfare. So now, this concept that we are going to mirror the United States, the formation of the US government will be evidenced in our world by giving up all nations of the world part of their power to this greater international body, the way we have the federation of the of all the countries, the way we do have the federal government that oversees the individual sovereign states. We're going to have a federation of world government that governs over collectively the independent sovereign countries and nations. Imagine how beautiful that would be. Now, this is what Abdu'l-Baha further states to the people that are cynical about all of this. No, we don't want to have this world federation. It can never come about. It sounds like a great idea, but how is it going to actually come about? Let's read further. To take but one instance, how confident were the assertion made in the days preceding the unification of the states of the North American continent regarding the insuperable barriers that stood in the way of their ultimate federation? Was it not widely and emphatically declared that the conflicting interests, the mutual distrust, the differences of government and habit that divided the states were such as no force, whether spiritual or temporal, could ever hope to harmonize or control? And yet how different were the conditions prevailing 150 years ago from those that characterize present-day society? It would indeed be no exaggeration to say that the absence of those facilities which modern scientific progress has placed at the service of humanity in our time made of the problem of building the American states into a single federation, similar, though they were in certain tradition, a task infinitely more complex than that which confronts a divided humanity in its efforts to achieve the unification of all mankind. Who knows that for so exalted a conception to take shape, a suffering more intense than any it has yet experienced will have to be inflicted upon humanity? Could anything less than the fire of a civil war, with all its violence and vicissitudes, a war that nearly rent the great American Republic, have welded the states not only into a union of independent units, but into a nation in spite of all the ethnic differences that characterize its component parts? That so fundamental a revolution involving such far-reaching changes in the structure of society can be achieved through the ordinary processes of diplomacy and education seems highly improbable. We have but to turn our gaze to humanity's blood-stained history to realize that nothing short of intense mental as well as physical agony has been able to precipitate those epoch-making changes that constitute the greatest landmarks in the history of human civilization. So it brings us to now, that this is not a utopian, this is not a far-fetched concept for our nations to come together and give up part, not all, part of their sovereignty up to this greater. So something similar to the United Nations that we have, unfortunately, that is not very effective. You have an international tribunal that their rulings don't stand at all. So many say, what is the purpose of having these international courts, tribunals, if their rulings have no effect or significance in our world? And yes, we're dealing with global issues. We're dealing with human trafficking. We're dealing with reference to child labor. These are serious humanitarian issues afflicting the globe. Not one part of the globe is immune to any of these deficiencies. And what is it stemming? Where is it stemming from? Prejudice, from materialism, greed. Enough is never enough. Obviously, we're discovering this, right? All this materialistic pursuit, not that it's bad, but if it's benefiting society as a whole, not benefiting part and neglecting the whole. So, and that's another topic for another talk. Now let's see what Bahá'u'lláh is speaking further on these, and these are important. That's why I picked out these passages. It's not that we wanted to kill time with reading passages, but it's significant for people to contemplate, to pause and reflect. These are words of God. He who is your Lord, the all-merciful, this is from Bahá'u'lláh, glory of God, cherished in his heart the desire of beholding the entire human race as one soul and one body. Haste ye to win your share of God's good grace. and mercy in this day that eclipseth all other created days. The words of Shoghi Afandi from the World Order of Bahá'u'lláh. But we do have words of Bahá'u'lláh as well, and we're reading it this next one is from Abdul Baha, but next one will be from Bahá'u'lláh. When we see poverty allowed to reach a condition of starvation, it is a sure sign that somewhere we shall find tyranny. Now, why did I put this passage? Materialism, racism, all interconnected, one feeds the other. So we can't separate it, right? A lot of the thread of the anti-immigration policies right now that we hear, exploitation of what? Of our resources, of what? Our financial resources, our human resources. It's all money, bogs down to money. So now let's read what Baha'u'lláh says. Soon Baha'u'llah's own words proclaim it, will the present day order be rolled up and a new one is spread out in its stead. Verily thy Lord speaketh the truth and is the knower of things unseen. By myself he solemnly asserts, the day is approaching when we will have rolled up the world and all that there is there and all that is therein, and spread out a new order in its stead. He verily is powerful over all things. The world's equilibrium, he explains, had been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order of Baha'u'lláh. Mankind's ordered life had been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. The signs of impending convulsion and chaos, he warns the peoples of the world, can now be discerned inasmuch as the prevailing order appeared to be lamentably defective. So yes, we have defective immigration system because it stems from all the prevailing order being defective. The violent derangement of the world's equilibrium, the trembling that will seize the limbs of mankind, the radical transformation of human society, the rolling up the present day order, the fundamental changes affecting the structure of government, the weakening of the pillars of religion, the rise of dictatorships, the spread of tyranny, the fall of monarchies, the decline of ecclesiastical institutions, religious institutions, the increase of anarchy and chaos, the extension and consolidation of the movement of the left, the fanning into flame of the smoldering fire of racial strife, the development of infernal engines of war, the burning of cities, as we've seen as of late, the contaminations of the atmosphere of the earth, we're witnessing that. These stand out as the signs and portents that must either herald or accompany the retributive calamity, which as decreed by him who is the judge and redeemer of mankind, must sooner or later afflict the society, which for the most part and for over a century has turned a deaf ear to the voice of God's messenger in this day. That's the problem. They've turned a deaf ear to the voice of God's messenger in this day. A calamity which must purge the human race of the dross of its age-long corruptions, materialism, prejudice, perpetuating hate, and weld its component parts into a firmly knit world embracing fellowship. A fellowship destined in the fullness of time to be incorporated in the framework and to be galvanized in the spiritualizing influences of a mysteriously expanding, divinely appointed order, and to flower in the course of future dispensations into a civilization the like of which mankind has at no stage in its evolution witnessed. That's profound. That is profound. This is what this faith offers the world. Hope. You're hearing over the past few months with this COVID-19, hope, the message of hope. The vitality of men's belief in God, Baha'u'lláh has testified, is dying out in every land. Nothing short of his wholesome medicine can ever restore it. The corrosion of ungodliness is eating into the vitals of human society. What else but the elixir of his potent revelation can cleanse and revive it? The world is in travail, he has further written, and its agitation waxeth day by day. Its face is turned towards waywardness and unbelief. Such shall be its plight that to disclose it now would not be meet and seemly. This is important, my friends. This is why we are where we are. This is why the highest institutions of the Baha'i faith, the Universal House of Justice, emphasized the two most challenging issues facing United States is materialism and racism. Baha'u'lláh states in his own words, the world is but one country and mankind its citizens. I don't know how we're doing time-wise. I don't want to go over the time, but I don't know if it's time to open it up to Q&A. Sorry if I was going a little bit too fast, but with the appearance of Baha'u'lláh in our world, what a gift. I'm not saying this because I happen to be a member of the Baha'i faith, but one of the teachings of the faith is the independent investigation of truth. We are all encouraged to investigate the truth for ourselves. So, and by finding the truth in the Baha'i faith, we're not refuting the past religious teachings and manifestations of God. In fact, if anything, it strengthens our love, our obedience to the past dispensations, teachings, and the manifestations of God. We have far more reverence and reflection on the words of Christ. And let me just, before I close my talk and open it to Q&A, I came across, which I don't want to just say it myself, but also have the read to you what the Christ has addressed the world, saying, except ye be converted and become as little children. This is significant. Ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And this brings us to the question, what is meant by children? What is our vision of children? Children are pure. Children are innocent. But again, they're innocent out of that weakness because of their state. But an adult who chooses to cleanse itself and to purify oneself, right, of all these defilements. Imagine having that innocence of that child, but the intelligence of an adult. And I will read to you what is required of this dispensation of all of us, Baha'is and non-Baha'is, all alike. A rectitude of conduct, which in all its manifestations offers a striking contrast to the deceitfulness and corruption that characterize the political life of the nation and of the parties and factions that compose it, a holiness and chastity that are diametrically opposed to the moral laxity and licentiousness, which defile, that means promiscuity, which defile the character of a not inconsiderable proportion of its citizen, an interracial fellowship completely purged from the curse of racial prejudice, which stigmatizes the vast majority of its people. So this is really a tall order for all of us. And as Baha'is, the highest institution called the Baha'is of the world to do what? With the peoples of our community. What are we supposed to do? It says Baha'is and like-minded individuals and organizations within our communities to do focus on three areas. What? Commitment to a path of systematic action, of learning, involving community building, social action, and participation in the discourses of society, in whatever communities in the world that we're living in. Because why? The community will never withdraw until the problems of race are completely resolved, no matter how long and difficult the path may be. So it's all about development of communities. It's going, as we hear all the time, people are even talking about this. It's starting at the grassroots level, which is us as communities developing and empowering our local communities, addressing local issues, and going all the way up. So there's not going to be any laws that's going to legislate as much as we want to. We cannot, man's laws are not able to control human heart. How we feel towards one another is a matter of consciousness. And the only way we can unite is recognition of the manifestation for this age and our love for this manifestation that's going to unite us and bring us all in, under the banner of this unity, of oneness of humanity, of this realization that we are in actuality all one. So yes, it is important for us to investigate who Baha'u'lláh is. Of course, the teachings of the Baha'i faith is, you know, a no-brainer to a human of consciousness. They will look at the teachings and say, well, that makes sense. Obviously, it's beautiful and it's desperately needed. But it's our recognition of the manifestation of this age, Baha'u'lláh, that's going to unify all of us. It's our love and allegiance to this cause that will unite all of us. I will open up. I don't know again how far we are with the time, but open it up to Q&A. Any questions from the friends?
Yes. So there are a few questions, and I want to remind the audience, please feel free to ask questions. Those of you are using YouTube or Facebook, again, please leave a comment, ask your question in the comments, and we'll try to answer that now as this video is happening live. So the first question that we have, I'm pulling it back up. Should they have signed in? Would they have been okay? That's not a good question. I don't know what it means. If you could re-ask that question, please do. Okay, so how is this relationship between prejudice, nationalism, and the immigration process as it stands now in its failures, how is it linked to one another?
How is it linked to the teachings of Baha'u'lláh, this call of oneness of humanity?
Yes.
How is immigration? Well, it's all linked, because why are we having these discussions right now? Why is there a threat to our economy? Why do we have a fear of the influx of these immigrants into our lands? Of course, it's directly related. It's our hatred that has created these boundaries. Abdu'l-Baha, in the beginning of my talk, stated it clearly. There was no boundary. In fact, if you go up in space, which never having shuttles go up, and they're talking about getting private shuttles where people can choose, the way we travel to France and other countries of the world, we can choose to travel to space. And when we do travel to the space and look down to the globe, we don't find these lines. So how did we become the gatekeepers? That's the critical question. I mean, where is the connection between the faith and what we're discussing with immigration laws? Who are the legislative bodies of this country? Human beings. I get elected, for instance, I'm a Baha'i, I cannot get elected to a partisan politics, of course, but let's say hypothetically Mr. X gets elected to this legislative body and will come up with this draconian immigration laws. Who are our immigration border patrols? Who are our immigration judges, lawyers? They're human beings. Mm-hmm. And so the hatred reverberates itself in our daily interactions. So yes, we'll start writing letters the way obviously people have for us to have the administration we have now. It didn't come about because one person rose up and said, I want to be the elected president. So we had, people that obviously out there who hate immigrants. Now the question becomes why, when you are yourself an immigrant? Whether you were born on this soil or not is irrelevant. Ancestrally, we are all immigrants, right? I just said in 1600, people came from all corners of the world on this land. And why did we come? We came for freedom. So who are we to feel that this land is being exploited? So didn't we, if we want to talk about exploitation, didn't we exploit the land of the native Indians then? I mean, where does it stop? That's the ridiculousness of all the prejudice. There is no rationality. There is no saneness in anything that we see in our society. I mean, I tell you, the insanity is to the point that they're discussing about denaturalizing citizens. So for the immigrants in this country who feel, oh yes, we want to just homogenize and start speaking hateful because we think that that's the American way, speaking hateful towards other immigrants, and say, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm a naturalized citizen. They're talking about denaturalizing even United States citizens. Yes, as crazy as it sounds. And children born of immigrants, single parent immigrant. Let's say you were born of a French mother. They're talking about deporting those people because they're claiming that that's not their nationality, US, the country that they were born. Now, my question is, where do you deport these people to? They're stateless, literally. The country of the mother or the father does not define the country of nationality for that child. And if you want to be so absurd, let's go back and say fifth generation Americans, well, their ancestors came from other parts of the world. So everybody gets deported off of this land. You see how ridiculous all of this sounds? And where is the connection of the Baha'i dispensation to this? There is a limit with hatred, but it's getting to the point that Baha'u'lláh clearly stated we're going to have such horrific plight that's going to come upon humanity. It talked about the burning of cities, contamination of the atmosphere. We're going to have a lot of environmental, unfortunate disasters. Talk about volcanoes, hurricanes. I mean, in astronomical propensity. So yes, we cannot turn the blind eye. We did that. Baha'u'lláh said that. We turned a deaf ear to the voice of God's messenger in this day. Are we going to continue our foolishness and turn the deaf ear and pretend that it's only a national issue and then have these patriotic sentiments that I'm an Iranian, I'm an American, and perpetuate these hatreds in our world? I don't know. I hope I've answered your question.
So I have this question that was it's linked to that. It's two questions because the first one I think can be linked with this one. So I talked about signing in. Someone asked if you can just sign in to the United States and become a U.S. citizen. That was their question. And then the second question is more of ask for your comment from George Vaya. He asked, in his near 30 years as a public defender, he has witnessed the institutionalized racism that is inherent in the criminal justice system. Shoaib Effendi has condemned as the three evils, nationalism, communism, and racialism, which are prevalent in governments across the world. And each one sees spiritual growth in a society as the weakness they can exploit and attack to expand the limits of their power. Please comment.
Absolutely. There is no doubt. As immigration lawyers, we work with criminal lawyers because, again, this doing away with the driver's license, you are going to hear a lot. And again, it's all hatred. You see, you have these groups of people that are so-called anti-immigrant. We are not going to even talk about this divisive political warfare that goes on because nothing comes out of it. It has not been productive. We've seen from 1920, as I stated, until now, so many presidents in power, so many administrations in force. It unfortunately, this issue has not been dealt with. And now, with reference to the criminalization of these poor immigrants, one of the misconceptions is that we're fearful because immigrants are criminals. So if they don't feed you prejudice one way, by saying that it's a threat to our economy, we're going to feed it to another way and justify our sickness, saying that these are criminals coming in. If you even read the stat, it says 80% of the immigrants have criminal convictions. What are these criminal convictions? Please, I oblige you to investigate. There are driving without a valid license. Now, Mr. Vaya has practiced in the as a defense attorney in the criminal justice system. He knows that that's an immediate criminal offense. When you get conviction, it's a felony, especially if you become habitual one. But if you can't drive to take your family member to the hospital, if you can't drive to survive, basic survival, basic human rights, what do you do with it? Now, the first question was, how do we become citizen? I get this phone call literally every day. I get American employers calling me, coming into my office. I've got this wonderful person from Philippines, from whatever part of the world. And I desperately need this nanny, for instance, or I desperately need this specialized skill of this employee in my company because I've advertised for many, many months. I have proofs of it here. And I just cannot find a US employee. They don't have this specialized skill. What do I do? The process is painstaking. As I, in the beginning of my talk stated, it took my family, which was one of the easiest cases that you could look at. was very straight cut, and simple cases. It took us 11 years to become naturalized. Now, there is a misconception between naturalization and obtaining your lawful permanent residency status. You cannot get to naturalization stage unless you have obtained your lawful permanent residency status. And that in itself, it's very long in its duration. It is painstakingly difficult for me to take the calls from these poor clients who call me unfortunately, I hate to say this, year by year, saying, what is the status of my case? They have their US citizen family members, they have petitioned for their child, for their parent, for their family members, and it takes years. For a sister to petition for another brother or sister, it takes, for some countries, 12 years. And now with the COVID-19, it came to a halt. Even if you're immediate relative, family member, a spouse, it came to a halt. They're not scheduling any of these interviews. And then you have immigrant visa numbers that is given to each category. And, God knows when that number becomes available, those numerical numbers that they're giving out, which again, it means how many cases was filed in what month. They're going to give numerical cutoff. Like, let's say 100,000 was filed in the month of January, immigrant visa petition. They're going to say 20,000 gets adjudicated throughout the whole year. We're not talking about in that 1 month. So imagine the frustrations. So yes, is this relevant? Are we in a point in our history that we're, down on our knees, begging for solution, begging for an answer? It's not going to come from man. We know that. It's literally we have proof of that, 1920 till now. If anything, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. I hope I answered both of the comment and the other question that came.
So just a question for those, when you were saying adjudicate, as it's a word that's legal, can you explain what you mean when it takes time for them to adjudicate?
To go through the process, the legal process of obtaining the late-term green card, and also in my situation was naturalization. And I was the third year in my undergrad when I received my citizenship, and I was in the National Honor Society of University of Tampa. Then I had to go through that process, which to me was unnecessary. I was a huge contributing factor to this country and to the people. In fact, when I was 18, I received a call from the US military. They wanted to desperately recruit me into the military because of my knowledge of the Persian language. So yes, a lot of the military force is composed of immigrants, the same immigrants. I have a client whose son is in the military and was at the borders, and my client was pleading to her son, who was born in US, obviously the mother is immigrant, and went through my office to obtain her legal status, was pleading to her son to have humanity, to show love towards the people that are coming to our borders. And that's the thing that you do not see is love. I spent 6 hours in our ICE facility in Tampa with a beautiful lady, survival of cancer, breast cancer. She's still going under treatment of the breast cancer, although just being a survivor doesn't mean that you're done with the disease, with this horrible cancer of the breast. She had pack of her medication with her. We sat there without water, without permission to use the lavatory, although they don't phrase it that way. They tell you, oh, you're free to use the bathroom. But surely when you come back and your client is not there, is detained like an animal in chains on the arms and on the legs. I mean, these are, pictures that we don't see in the media. I wish they would show them. A person who doesn't even have a traffic ticket is being treated worse than an animal. She was sitting there with me, again, without her medication, without her water. Her husband and her 2 brilliant kids, they were gifted kids. They were sitting out there and it was cold. It was in January. The winds were blowing. They had the blanket, the sister the sister-in-law of my client was sitting there with a blanket, covering herself, being cordial, and false statements were given to them. Unfortunately, untruth. They were coming out, terrorizing these two children, lying literally to these two children, saying that your mother is back in Mexico while we're sitting inside. And yet, not to forget, you had a hardcore criminal immigrant sitting in a very small room with us. But because of so many hours being there, of course, I was praying as a Baha'i, invoking, supplicating God for the plight of humanity. Really, it was heart-wrenching. And of course, I befriended the guards that were inside the immigration office. One of them, two were Hispanic, one was African-American, and one was Caucasian, who really got good friends with me. Knew an attorney friend of mine, Mr. Enrique Escarez, who does Social Security law. And we spoke about this disease of prejudice, of why we are where we are. He took such liking in us that he said, I will protect you. Please come and stand close to me with your client, because that is a dangerous immigrant. Now, mind you, they have somebody with no traffic ticket, nothing, immaculate criminal record. They have somebody like that in a room with me, an attorney, with somebody who's a hardcore, dangerous criminal in one room. This is the plight of 6 hours. When I came home, I was exhausted. And yet, this individual, we were cooperative. They were provoking us, provoking the family of my clients, myself. When we came out the first time that it was cold, we noticed the two children sitting by these, what do they call these barricades of the parking lot? They were hiding behind one of the cars, sobbing. I mean, the crying was not just crying, sobbing, curling up together, holding one another up in a curled position, crying. Imagine, I have no idea how many hours they were crying in that posture, but it was heart-wrenching. Why? How did we come to this point in our history? And why masses of Americans don't know? They think it's a matter of getting in line to get your status, your residency status. It's not that simple. Then there is no line. What line are you going to stand in? There is no line to stand in to become legalized in this country right now as we speak. And it's getting worse. What can we do? Investigate the Baha'i teachings. The sooner we can penetrate the hearts of individuals around us, the way I did at the post office. I just merely went to the post office and we had someone who had huge misconception of the US immigration laws. And when she got liking in me, she turned to me, she says, you are an immigrant. She says, you would be the one of those people that we hear in our politics and in our government who would want to deport. I said, yes, they want to denaturalize somebody like me. So you could see me on the TV in Iran being killed basically because of my religious belief in the Baha'i faith. She says, I can't bear to see that. You seem to be an amazing, wonderful person. I love you. And I got to meet you only in this line of the post office for 15 minutes. I learned a lot. I can't imagine. I said, well, that's prejudice. That's what's perpetuated in our community. Because I'm not bad, as you see for yourself. I'm serving my nation more than anyone could possibly imagine. I served the indigent community. I had so many, and I didn't even list it. I was volunteering with Gulf Coast Legal Community, Gulf Coast Services. I had volunteered the community law program before becoming a board of trustees. That means hours spending at St. Pete Free Clinic and all these ALFs, elderly, facilities, doing last will and testaments for them, advance directives for them, fighting injustices that they were facing because they were marginalized, the minorities. The housing authority as a hearing officer was the same thing. It was all the African Americans that unfortunately were not given the opportunity and are in our housing programs. And they were not, mind you, being treated all the time fairly. So these are critical issues facing humanity. And it is getting, as Baha'u'lláh said, agitation waxeth day by day. Why? Because we've turned away from God. We don't have that inclination to turn towards investigation of this truth, religion, not inheriting religion, not going by with what our parents and our grandparents are telling us what religion is, but investigating, finding the deeper meanings in the prophecies given in all these religions, and realizing that spiritual unity, right? The oneness within the manifestations of God. Baha'u'lláh says to denounce one, you've denounced all. So we might as well, as Baha'is, when we become Baha'is, we might as well forget about becoming Baha'is if we have prejudice towards another religious belief or manifestation of God. So we believe in all of them. I'm sorry I gave a long answer to that question. I don't know if there are any other questions left.
Not at all. That was a very adequate answer. We appreciate it very much.
So my plea to humanity, not just the members that were able to join us this morning, but I turn to my clients every day and telling them the same thing. You don't like what you see, do something about it. And what is the constructive way of doing something about this? Let's apply the spiritual solution, because we're going to get there sooner or later. We're going to get to the promise of God, which is peace.
So what you're saying, I want to connect it to this question, because already you can continue what you're saying and have this question in mind. So there's the question. It's a two-parter from Phil Bruiser. The question is, for an average person today in July 2020, is there any hope of immigration to the USA? And the second question, is there any reason to immigrate to the USA? So those are the two questions.
Wonderful questions. I would encourage immigration into US, obviously, because this is a country that was, that again, it's a wonderful country. It's a country of opportunities. As many have said, it's the diversity enhances its beauty. We are very diverse. I have hope, as the Baha'i faith has given us the same hope, that yes, we will have brighter days ahead. But again, it's critical for us as humanity to take some actions. Have these discussions that we're having this morning within our own communities. Why do we hate? Why is this misconception of this exploitation or the criminality of these immigrants into our nation? These are critical questions and conversations to have. The same conversation I had with this beautiful lady that I met, that was really anti-immigrant, mind you, in the US Post Office. But she says, I learned a lot from you. And I turned to her, I said, thank you. I've learned a lot from you as well. Because we all have our own misconceptions, our own prejudice, regardless of who we are and where we live. But this is time of reflection, of really looking within ourselves and finding those prejudices and dealing with those issues. So yes, immigration, yes, if you can write to your US Congress and say the richness of our community is because of its diversity, that we want to espouse, we want to encourage and have laws that are encouraging this diversity, having immigration. Of course, in future, it's going to be done away with. The borders, of course, we talked about that. But for the time being, having a more sensible immigration laws and a more welcoming and an open one, more avenues to allow these people to immigrate to US. But it is very, very at a very bad point in our history. I know the American Immigration Lawyers Association, brilliant attorneys are doing great works. I'm a member of that association since 1996. So there are great works ahead of us. It's very difficult, but again, we have to address this at a grassroots level. It's not going to go away overnight. And if we really care for our immigration systems right now, then we have more and more these discussions and reach out to the community that's blindly feeding in on these unfounded fears. And educating. Ignorance comes, as Abdu'l-Baha says, from lack of knowledge. So what is knowledge is information, facts. So if you're providing facts the way I do to my clients, and I tell them to educate their own circles, that is what we need to do. Education is the answer. We don't have public service announcement. We don't utilize the media to educate community on these issues. We just talk of the problem. We don't talk about the process that brought us to this problem. So we need to have more these discussions of process and not just the outcome, reactive measures, the way that we respond to these things. And putting on a Band-Aid, it's not going to suffice on a deep wound. We know that when you have a deep wound, you don't take a little Band-Aid and try to apply that over a massive deep wound that the world is unfortunately faced with. So yes, I'm marching forward with the US immigration laws. As an immigration lawyer, I don't give up. I tell the clients not to give up. It takes creativity on the parts of lawyers and a lot of love. And that love and creativity comes from our sense of this greater awareness that we're all one human family. That it's not about money, it's about representation of countless individuals in their plight of coming to a land where at least they're not being persecuted for their fundamental basic human rights, and beliefs. Hopefully I've answered. And I wanted to give just a closure on what I spoke to you about the beautiful lady that has a breast cancer. She's still in the country, although they were adamant that she had to either obtain her travel tickets back to Mexico, or they will detain her. And I will use the word cage because that's pretty much how they treat you, like an animal. They take you in shackles and chains. And so I spoke to the supervisor who happened to be Mexican. And essentially, I spoke from my heart to his heart. That was effective representation. It wasn't about discussion of the law. It was for all human. And to have somebody who has a cancer of the breast and to put her into a detention center, she's not a threat to the community. She's not a flight risk. What is the purpose? So thank God, God came to our rescue and assisted us. But more so, this family, I gave them the powerful tablets of Bahá'u'lláh. One is tablet of Ahmad, and the other is a prayer, the long healing prayer in the Baha'i faith. And I told this friend of mine, my clients are my friends. I told this beautiful lady that, please, friend of mine, read these tablets in Spanish, but you have to have sincerity of a heart and purity of the heart to know that it will work. And I gave her a picture of Abdu'l-Baha, which we reference, who is the eldest son of the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Bahá'u'lláh. She took the picture of Abdu'l-Baha. She says, well, I want this picture to be in a respectful place. I'm not even going to put it in my purse. I'm going to put it in my coat jacket's pocket. So every time, the twice or the three times that we went back, again for another 5-6 hours, she had placed this picture of Abdu'l-Baha in her coat pocket. And surely the last day that we went with the plane tickets in our hands, and that was another plight in itself, they were forcing us to get a direct flight, and there were no direct flights. So we finally had this Hispanic deportation officer as well in the Tampa office, ruthlessly telling us that we're wasting her time. We said, well, let's not waste your time. Tell us what side, where do we go? Who do we call to get this direct flight? So finally we got this so-called direct flight to the Mexico, not where she lives, but to a place that we could find a direct flight to. So when we went with the tickets, they had submitted their will to the will of God because of the teachings of Baha'u'lláh and Baha'i faith that I had shared with them. We went with confidence. And lo and behold, she was checked in with her GPS that I had placed on her phone, not on her ankle. We had also persuaded and convinced them that there's no need to put an ankle bracelet. So they did place it on the phone. And she went to check in with them and to show them the ticket. And the lady just says, look, the deportation officer is not here. Just you guys go ahead and go. And she says, well, tomorrow, am I supposed to report to the airport at a particular place to leave, they said, no, don't worry about it. You don't have to leave. So when she stepped out, of course, it took a lot of efforts on our parts as well to bring it to that point, but it was miraculous because no matter what efforts you put forward, if they are determined to send you back home, nothing is going to change their mind. I know this. I've dealt with this for over 24 years. And not just with the Tampa office, but many other deportation offices and immigration courts. So anyhow, we stepped out, and this beautiful friend of ours, she takes that picture of Abdul Baha, shows that to me, and kisses the picture and says, thank you. And she's weeping. And of course, I am weeping because of her faith in this power of this dispensation. So this is the glorious testimonies that is just one amongst many that I can share with the peoples of the world, not just Baha'is, but the peoples of the world. And
So I have one question for you, and I'm going to package it such a way so you can answer this productively. So the question is partly an assertion. The person thinks you're attacking ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, because ICE, American institution, keeps Americans safe, and they vet people to ensure that we have the right people coming on a merit basis. And further, that we're Baha'is, we should not get into politics. Can you please distinguish how this is not attacking ICE or getting involved in politics?
Not at all. I have high respect for the Immigration Customs Enforcement. In fact, the officers, some of them are very close friends of mine, not at the Tampa office necessarily, but other offices. As lawyers, we work with them closely. Unfortunately, and it has nothing to do with politics, this is a humanitarian issue. How we treat one another. It's, for instance, the same problem that humanity is faced with. It's the treatment of the African American by people, not so much by the police department. Mr. Ahmaud Arbery was attacked by civilians. He was not attacked by the police department of any jurisdiction. So no, I wish that was the issue. That I have utmost respect. I know that they're functioning and fulfilling a very important role. As Baha'is, we never involve ourselves into partisan politics. In fact, we uphold the laws of any nations that we live in. So no, that is not at all. I'm trying to become a U.S. immigration judge myself, where I will look favorably not only at the defense immigration lawyers, but also at the the trial attorneys that are doing significant amount of work. But I'm dealing with them one-on-one. I'm hearing their frustration. I'm hearing their griping over a failing system. And it's not with reference to this administration or the previous administration or the one before. So there's no attack per se of any political regime or any policy per se. This is attacking prejudice. This is what it's attacking, because individuals are encompassing these places of positions, correct? As a U.S. immigration judge, I'm going to be a human that sits in that position. So I will come in with my biases, obviously. So an attack of per se, me as an individual, is not an attack on the entire EOIR. So just the treatment that we received of—
What is EOIR?
Immigration, Executive Office of Immigration. And they are, pardon me, I'm just—
Review, sorry, I'll fill it in, review at the end.
A review, yes, losing track of what the gist of the discussion, because it's really critical. And these are discussions that have divided humanity, saying, oh, why are you attacking one over another? First of all, if we're one soul and one body, no one attacks anyone. And ignorance comes from this lack of knowledge. So with utmost respect, and this is sincere statement that is coming from my mouth, I love each and every one of the servants or the public servants in our community. My grandfather was a police officer who died in line of duty. But so I have no objection to members that are public servants. We admire them, especially I as an individual, if that the question is posed to me as a person, because the Baha'i faith has nothing, no stance when it comes, it's utmost respect and love towards all. And we're obedient to the laws of all nations. But it's matter of ignorance. And even as you saw the outcome of this particular situation that I shared with you, it's not just because of miraculously things, obviously it was hands of God that was involved, but even that one particular Hispanic immigration officer that I referred to you, she built that bond of friendship with me because she saw my genuine, sincere love towards her and her position in that capacity, and that she's there fulfilling a purpose. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But is it correct for me and my client to be in the same room with a violent criminal? No. So we're not attacking per se the system or the individuals. We're looking at this in a wholesome way. That is it right? Is this where we want to be? Do we want to be in a position where we put these public servants in a very horrible position to deport these individuals or treat them the way that no one wants these people to be treated? No, absolutely not. So we've lost that balance. So yes, by all means, please do not walk away from this talk thinking that we're disrespectful to any agency of a government of our great nation, none at all.
So I want to actually get clarification on the point, because I feel that there was something that is important. The fact that you have people who enforce the law and people who don't follow the law, corruption, these kinds of things. Would you say that's an emerging issue that's really the source of this problem? Or you have people who are literally taking what they call the law, but they are acting in a place of authority that they don't have? Would you say that's more of a problem than anything?
Again, it's abuse of power, but it's far more than that. It is ignorance. When we're ignorant, we have prejudices.
So who's wielding that? Is it that someone keeps another person ignorant, or is it the person doesn't want to investigate?
It's the lack and the drive of wanting to seek knowledge. That's the sad part. We're lacking that. It's that turning away from the source, which is God. We've turned away from him. And these are these relevant teachings, and it's going to get worse and worse. So if we're going to look and nitpick at little issues that we're confronted with and missing the huge point is that if we turn away from God, it's going to just get deeper and deeper, this divide, this division. People are going to take sides foolishly. It's a land of, we want to make sure that we don't have criminals coming in. People fell out of status. Let's remind people, because people keep saying undocumented immigrants. Well, we're not just dealing with undocumented immigrants. We were dealing with people who came in lawful statuses and fell out of statuses. So that's big chunk of this undocumented, quote unquote, reference. Again, lack of education, lack of knowledge has brought us to this point. So yes, you have Europeans who are in this country, who are of Caucasian skin color, right? They're white. Let's get down to the nitty gritty of this, since this question came up. And the law is not enforced against them. They drive, they go into the grocery stores, they violate every law in the book imaginable, but they look more like our European counterparts in our country. So they get away with it. Simple. They get away with it. They don't get picked up at bus stations. They don't get racially profiled while they're driving in Haines City or, Polk County, Osceola County. They don't get racially profiled because they look just like the rest of the so-called Americans that are not marginalized. So you see, the issues are really deep. I went for a client who was Caucasian from Eastern Europe, committed a serious offense. It was in a brawl fight, assault. The person gets out. ICE comes to the jail and doesn't pick that person up. Now you tell me, what's the difference between a Caucasian in jail that gets the hold removed, the ICE hold removed, versus you get a Hispanic that gets picked up? While she has all her immigration paperwork in the system as we speak, she gets picked up on a Sunday morning from her home. And then she's told that why she may be, because she was resisting them, which wasn't true. I was on the telephone on the other end with the husband of this individual. So one can say to oneself, why? Why is that discrimination there? Why are there lies being given? Why those two children curling up together had to hear this lie that your mother has already been sent home to Mexico? These are questions, answers that I don't have. But I can refer all of you to is hatred. That's what's at the bottom of all of this, right? That makes sense. When we discriminate, where does that come from? From hatred. There's no other way of putting this. Why did the Indians after September 11 from India, the Sikhs, why were they shot in an airport? There was one gentleman shot because he had a turban that resembled maybe somebody from the Middle East, an Islamic person. Now, Sikhism, for the people who have investigated, is they were in war with the Muslims, defending themselves because they were being killed by the Muslims. So this gentleman gets shot and killed in the airport because why? He has a turban on his head. Now, if that's not ignorance, I don't know what is. And if it's not discrimination. So this is what we're dealing with. It's not that we're anti this or anti that, or we're disrespectful. ICE agents that I told you, the lady is Hispanic background. The supervisor is Mexican, who I sat and reasoned with to have this lady, this friend of mine. My clients are all my friends. This friend to be not detained. So yes, no, I have utmost respect, utmost admiration for our agencies, for the public servants. These public servants happen to be all immigrants themselves, in fact, naturalized immigrants. If you go to the USCIS office, you'll see that. You see people like myself who are naturalized, who are immigration officers, doing magnificent jobs. But then you have personalities, you have prejudices, you have biases that, rears its ugly head in our society. So we need to abolish, eradicate. This is what the Baha'i faith is all about. And the only way we can eradicate and touch human heart is recognition of the manifestation for this age. Even Christ, Muhammad, admonished us that when the glory of God, in the Judaism, it's the Lord of hosts. It's referenced to with different names. In Islam is Mahdi. When the appearance of the manifestation of God for this age, Baha'u'lláh, came, we are admonished to recognize. Why? It's because of all the issues that we're talking about this morning. People tell me I'm doing great work. I'm not doing great work. Baha'u'lláh is doing great work. To mobilize a person like me to look at every client that walks through my door the same, to love them the same, to provide them equal representation, regardless of their nationality and their skin colors.
Thank you so much for sharing this all with us. We really appreciate it. There's several questions that we were not able to get to the answer today, but at the same time, the questions that we were able to ask, you did a phenomenal job getting to them, where people can definitely, after having watched this, investigate the laws that are in play.
That is the solution to the world. It's not because, again, it's not coming from a mouth of a Baha'i. Gandhi himself said, it's a solace to the world. Of course, he inspired Dr. King. Leo Tolstoy, a famous writer, he said that prisoner in Akka has the key. So are we going to go around and around and around and waste our time on, attacking one another, upholding our nationalistic sentiments, and, fighting literally over nothing? Again, it's not to disrespect the institutions that are in power, but it's one thing to respect, it's another to give our entire allegiance to them to the point of fighting senselessly with one another instead of rising. And I will end with this morning's talk with Mr. Grossman, who was German by ancestry and was a former Universal House of Justice member. What he stated to us, always reminded us, is of this earthworm, the caterpillar. Once we have faith in God, which is like that caterpillar that trusts itself into that cocoon, and what happens in that cocoon, the earthworm or that caterpillar does not know what's going to happen to it, but we know that in that cocoon, it turns into this beautiful butterfly and flies away. If it chooses not to go into that cocoon, what does it happen to the life of that earthworm? Just that lowly earthworm, it's going to crawl in that dust and die, not ever experiencing what a butterfly experiences. So this is our choice as humanity. Are we going to be those earthworms that are going to nitpick and going to find causes to divide ourselves, whether it's ideological or, as to notions or other, bases of division? Are we going to really be those earthworms that is going to crawl and die with no significance? Or are we going to be that butterfly that's going to transform and let go of our lower, baser part, the animal part, and rise above to the nobler station that God created us? He says he created us in his image. Are we in his image today? Look around. Are we in God's image? Are we manifesting attributes of God by killing one another on these ideologies and upholding, these senseless, man-made approaches to a spiritual problem that we're faced with? So I'm going to leave you off at that and let your voice of conscience, which is voice of God within each one of us. I always tell people we have to live with our conscience. And that's an amazing thing to be reminded of. When we die and we're giving reckoning to our Creator, to that one Creator that created the whole world and all of us within it, that would be a question to really ask oneself. What legacy are we leaving behind? How are we going to face our Maker, our Lord, our majestic, beautiful, glorious Lord, who sent guidance? He never neglected humanity. And the guidance for this age is the message of Bahá'u'lláh. And it's simple. It is very, very simple. But we have to want to bring about this change within ourselves. Transform. I need to transform me to transform the community and the greater world around me. Until and unless that happens, we're going to be delving with all these, we're going to be the earthworms. We're not going to be these beautiful butterflies. We're not going to soar up high. So it's a choice for humanity, but we know we're going to get to the glorious destiny of human beings, which is world peace. But we have choice to rise together or fall and stumble to that glorious destiny. So I might pray to all of you. I hope it's rising together. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. We wish you a beautiful week ahead as well.
Thank you. Likewise to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.